All right, there you are.
You just
Okay, then
can't
I'm gonna
see
go
me.
ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and start now then.
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right. Good afternoon. Hope you all have had a nice lunch, and we would like to welcome you to the successful. Why is it not working? Successful IELCE programming session. And I am Bevan Gibson, the director of the Southern Illinois Professional Development Center, and joining me today are Catherine Porter from she's a professional development specialist at the Adult Learning Resource Center, and Marcia Luptak, the Associate Dean of Adult Education at Elgin Community College. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll be answering them. If they pertain to something that's right away, we'll maybe try to answer that as we go. Otherwise, we'll address it. Our agenda for today is overview of IELCE and what that actually is. And then we're going to talk a little bit about IELCE possible program models. And then Marcia is going to bring to us actually IELCE in action. So what an actual program that uses IELCE funding for with IETs is doing. And then we'll talk about some resources in professional development. And then finally, if there are any final questions at the end, we'll address those. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here, and my job today is to set the scene here for our session. So IELCE is Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education. So that's also known as Section 243 of WIOA. And if you've been in adult ed a long time, then you will remember IELCE Civics, which began about 15 years ago under WIA, our previous Adult Ed Act. So all states receive annual 243 funding according to a formula that's based on the number of immigrants in a state who have been admitted, who receive LPR status, legal permanent resident status, or sometimes we call that green card status. So this year in Illinois, funds were allocated to 29 programs. So if you are attending today, I'm pretty sure you're probably one of our 29 Illinois IELCE programs. And the last bullet on the screen talks about eligible participants. So WIOA designates that students in IELCE programs must be adult English language learners. And the law calls out in particular immigrants who are professionals with degrees and credentials in their native countries. The intent of Section 243 is to tap into this population of educated, degreed immigrants and bring them into the workforce at a level that matches their skills. Although participation is not restricted, of course, only to those immigrants. So we can move on to the next slide. So Bevan, if you can change the slide. Thank you so much. So what are the requirements, the required components of a compliant IELCE program? So this is a new graphic, you probably haven't seen it before, that Bevan and I put together to help you visualize the required components. So there's a fair amount of flexibility, as we're going to see. And I'm going to talk first about the components in the blue box with the green circle on it, which is the ESL and the Civics component. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So this slide defines the ELA component, English Language Acquisition, or ESL component. And if you look at the language from the law, you'll see it looks very familiar to just what we would consider regular ESL classes. That the goal of instruction is to help our students develop listening, speaking, reading, writing skills in English in order to attain the goals here that are in the bullets. This is just similar to all WIOA language. Attainment of our secondary school diploma, transition to post-secondary education or job training, or employment. It's also the same goal as our Illinois ESL content standards. So this slide it defines our civics component. So all programs are required to include instruction on the rights and responsibilities of citizenship and civic participation. And when I was teaching civics to ESL students, I loved teaching during an election year since it all would come alive right in front of us. And I can imagine that civics teachers all across America are working overtime right now in these days here this week. So that was a little aside. Whoops, nope, go back for a second. Yeah. So this required component in Illinois is addressed through our Illinois IELTS Civics competencies. We have 71 competencies in 7 areas, and programs have a great deal of flexibility as to what competencies they choose to include and how they integrate this into their curriculum. And Marcia is going to show you a little later which competency areas her college has designated for which ESL levels. Okay, we can move on. So that was the blue. So now we're going to look down at the purple on the bottom. This is the workforce preparation and career awareness activity component. So this one is, you'll see, notice those 2 red arrows. Again, we have flexibility in program design. This can be integrated into the ESL civics class or into the workforce training component. So before we start looking at the program models, we'll just briefly look at how the law defines workforce preparation activities. That's on our next slide. So if you look here on the left, you'll see the language from the law, all these components of workforce preparation activities. And Bevan, if you hit the, there we go, our little animation there. This is very similar to the same kinds of content that we find in the Illinois Essential Employability Skills Framework. And this is where I'm going to turn it over to Bevan, who's going to talk briefly about this framework and then the program models for implementation.
Hi. The Illinois Essential Employability Skills Framework and Self-Assessments is available on the ICCB website, and it's listed right there on the screen, and I may let Miley put that into the chat if she'd like to do so, for your ability to do that. But essentially, the Essential Employability Skills Framework and Self-Assessment is something that you can use in your program to decide how you're going about incorporating employability skills into your actual existing curriculum. So there's a place in there for the program to look at it, but there's also a place for instructors to use in that self-assessment to say how they're actually incorporating that into their lessons and into what they're doing in their classrooms. So in addition to this, Employment 101 on the Illinois WorkNet is something that can also be used for students at a distance, because in this day and age, we know we're doing a lot of things from a distance or hybrid wise. And so if you wanted to use the Employment 101, that actually has incorporated the Illinois Essential Employability Skills into it. We worked with them to do so, and the students would just need to set up an Illinois WorkNet account in order to access that. So if they had a Gmail account or whatever, they could actually do that. So Catherine talked about the adult ed component with the ESL and ELA and the civics education. She talked about the workforce preparation and career awareness activities and how they have to be included in either the adult ed or in the workforce training component. So I'm going to go a little bit more talking about the adult ed, the workforce training component. And this is the interesting piece. Catherine and I both attended a training last week that was all about IELCE and had the federal people there. And you're going to notice that on this it says it can be a bridge program or a pre-IET, or it can be an ICAPS IET. That's what we found out last week, that the federal government has, OCTAE has expanded the ability for IELCE programs. In the past, they said it had to be connected to an IET, or you at least had to have an IET option. And so now they said that a bridge program would suffice as a pre-IET for students to be actually connected to those, which we thought was totally exceptional and a lifesaver in some boats. The ICAPS or IET piece that's part of the workforce training component, it could be hooked up to your own program. So if your program has an IET or an ICAPS program, those students could then they could have access They don't have to attend the ICAPS program, but there needs to be one made available to them, okay? And so that could be your program that has that, and then it could be other programs within your APC. And this is what we also found out from them, is that if you have other programs within your APC that have ICAPS programs, then your responsibility for your program then is to share information with your IELCE students about the existence of those ICAPS programs and the possibility that they could access those programs. And so that would be the responsibility of your program, would be to share information with your IELCE students about existing ICAPS programs. If you don't happen to be, if you're a CBO and you're getting IELCE funding and you don't have an ICAPS program, you can either do a bridge program as a CBO for those students, or you could work within your APC to talk to some of the colleges or some of the other programs that may be offering an ICAPS program. And those IELCE students that wish to actually access those ICAPS programs could then transition into those ICAPS programs while still being an IELCE within your program. Okay? Any questions about that? Someone said they're dancing in their dress over here. Okay, IELCE possible program models. We'll look at this and say, okay, one of these, we're going to kind of use an example here of a healthcare bridge, okay? So you could do, for a bridge program under IELCE, you could offer English for Healthcare Careers Bridge, okay? This is an example of what you might do with this. So you would then, with that, because it's a bridge, it would have contextualized ESL and civics curriculum, because if it's IELCE, it's going to need to have the civics curriculum. So it would be contextualized to healthcare, okay? And then you would provide career awareness as part of that, and that would be your workforce preparation activities. You would do those workforce preparation activities as part of that bridge program, and you would have support services through a career navigator or a transition specialist or whatever the person is that you call that person within there. Then the ICAPS piece of this would be maybe a CNA or a medical assistant, and it would be a certificate program, okay? So with that, you would have integrated curriculum where you would have team teachers or trainers. If you have an ICAPS Model 2, you have an external trainer. Workforce preparation activities, you would have workforce training that is either offered by CTE or an external training program that results in an industry recognized credential or certificate. And once again, as I said, you would, if it's not going to be within your program, then you need to check and make sure you share the information for an existing CNA or medical assistant program that might be in your APC region that these students could access as their IET. So it would be available to them to access. And then comprehensive support services as part of an ICAPS program. There are some allowable workforce training expenses using 243 funds, and the 243 funds are the IELCE funds, okay? They're not adult ed dollars, they're federal funds, 243 funds. And what you can pay for with those funds is for an instructor or external training salaries for bridges or IETs, okay? You can pay for equipment and supplies for the bridges or the IETs if it's not of a personal nature. Now, Kathy and I talked about this because uniforms, you know, our students don't want to eat food that's prepared by anybody else. They're not going to want to wear a uniform that somebody else has worn. So that is more of a personal nature. And those students, then the personal nature things would be kept by the students at the end of the class. So if they're going to be kept by the students at the end of the class, then it's not something that can be paid for out of these 243 funds. So an example would be of things that are allowed would be welding kits. Those are allowable expenses. Boots are not, okay? So boots they're going to take home, uniforms are going to take home, but welding kits allowable because they're going to be using those, and those can be left to be used again, okay? Credential testing is also an allowable expense if it's part of or required by the ICAPS or the IET program. So if it's not required to take a test or credential testing for that, then it's not an allowable expense. It has to be required by the ICAPS program. Tuition is not an allowable 243 expense. But I can also add that another possible funding source for some of these things, such as that may be a personal nature, would be Perkins 5 funding. Because if they're part of an ICAPS program, not a bridge program, because bridge is totally adult ed, but if they're part of ICAPS programs, then Perkins $5 can be used for equipment and supplies as well, in addition to some of the 243 funds. So if you blend those together, we always talk about blended funding and braided funding. So that is a source of the braided funding piece for an IELCE program that they can use in terms of an ICAPS program, but not the bridges, okay? So at this point in time, I think it's really important that we turn this over to somebody boots on the ground, so to speak. And Marcia, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and you can just let me know when you want me to advance your slides, if you would.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Marcia Luptak. I'm the Associate Dean at Elgin Community College. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the changes and adaptations we had to make to our program under the new WIOA regulations for IELCE funding. So what I'm going to walk you through is some of the considerations and the changes we had to make in our program in order to be eligible for this funding pool. We did have to work on both our manufacturing and healthcare pathways, but today I'm going to focus on our healthcare pathway, as it's a really good model of the changes we made. So first of all, we really had to look at what the new models looked like in order to understand what we needed. So we really looked at what the models looked like and said, okay, what do we already have in place? What do we need to add or develop? And we also needed to identify possible partnerships. So in our program, we already received civics funding under WIA, but we only offered civics at a very small level. We only offered it as a couple of classes, so not all of our students took civics classes. And in these classes, we didn't specify which competencies that students should be doing. So it's kind of hit or miss depending on the semester they took it. One semester they might do healthcare, the next semester they might do school systems. So it really wasn't cohesive as a program. And we really wanted to look at our EL Civics and say, hey, this is something that's beneficial to all ESL students. So why aren't we putting a priority on getting all of these competencies into our program, or as many competencies, at least all the areas, into our program as possible. We also had to look at our healthcare bridge. It was another component that we already had. But when we developed our healthcare bridge, we didn't intentionally incorporate the civics component or the workforce preparation component, because we developed it quite a way back. And we decided that we needed to do this in a more intentional way. The healthcare class we had was primarily an exploratory class, and it rarely led to the direct transition of students into healthcare programs. We found that they still needed additional education before they were ready to make that transition. It was more like a pre-bridge class, what we call pre-bridge now. So we knew we'd have to go through this and redo the curriculum for this class to make sure it was really a true bridge into the healthcare. We also had ICAPS programming in healthcare available. We had a program in dental office assistants. So we did have that component of it, but this was limited because not everybody wants to be a dental office assistant. So we were thinking about, okay, how can we expand in the healthcare field? We had a lot of people that were interested in BNA, nursing, and other programs in the healthcare field. So we thought we really need to look at what we're offering and what we can offer. We also received a Title III grant that was to encourage us to help us scale our ICAPS programming. So this really helped us be able to do this. So as we were doing this, we realized that we really needed to get our partners on board. We needed to talk to other people in the college. So there's a lot of reaching out to CTE and talking to directors of the BNA and phlebotomy program, talking to directors of surgical tech. We looked at emergency services. So we really tried to look at different programs to see where there might be a good fit for ICAPS. So as we reached out to these programs, we had several things that we had to consider. So first of all, we had to identify what the outcomes were for these programs, because part of the requirement is that the students receive an industry-recognized certificate or a college certificate, which is also industry-recognized. So we looked primarily at our basic vocational specialist certificates, because these were short-term programs, generally, 1, 2, 3 semesters with a reasonable number of credit hours. Some of our partners are very wonderful. I know they looked at their programs to see if there's some adjustments they needed to make in order to meet that 1 to 2 semester requirement. And we also, again, considering what classes were required and which classes they could put later into a higher certificate. So for example, like dental office aid, originally they had a speech component, and they said, well, no, we really don't have to have that speech during the basic, the BBS. We can move that higher in the program, which helped our ICAP students to be a little bit more successful, because that was one of the challenges for them. We also worked with them to develop block schedules.
Just a moment.
Oh, sorry, my phone's thinking I'm talking to it. Okay. We also tried to develop block schedules so that the students could take the classes and still be able to work, because a lot of our students that were in the program were still employed somewhere else, not maybe in the field they wanted to be employed in, but they had jobs. So we had to think about that. So we were working with our partners for that. Another consideration for the program were the entry requirements, because we didn't want to prepare the students to get into a class that they couldn't meet the requirements for. So one of the challenges we had is that most of our healthcare and our emergency services program requires students to take the PSB test. It's the Psychological Services Bureau Health Occupations Aptitude Examination. And if it sounds like a lot of words, it's a challenging test. It's as challenging as it is to say it. And our students were required to meet a minimum score, or any students going into the programs needed to meet a minimum score on that test in order to get into the programs. So this exam includes things like academic aptitude, verbal, arithmetic, and nonverbal aptitude, spelling, reading comprehension, natural sciences, and vocational aptitude. So you can see where this would be quite challenging for some of our English language learners. So we talked about what was the purpose of the test, what did the test look like, how can we prepare students to take this test, because we really wanted them to be able to take our bridge class and be able to go into these ICAPS programs. Now, some of our partners were very agreeable to lowering the standards a little bit for our students, because they were going to have the ICAP supports, but that wasn't the case across the board. We also needed to make sure that we understood the oral language skills recommended for the program so that our ELs would be successful. And we also needed to know if there were residency requirements. For example, if they needed to have legal residency in order to get a job in the field, or even to take the test to be licensed. Once we identified possible programs, we then shifted back to looking at the civics competencies and the workforce preparation skills to see how they could be meaningfully integrated into our ICAPs, into our healthcare pathway. Okay, Bevan, if you'll move on. Next slide. Okay, so at this point, we were ready to develop our program structure. Part of this included the intentional integration of civics using that as a context for our classes, integrating career awareness and workforce preparation activities, and identifying support services that were needed and add them if necessary, including any types of financial supports. So first of all, we reviewed all of our courses to determine how civics competencies could be integrated more intentionally. So what we did is, instead of having a civics class as a separate class that students may take, we took the civics competencies and we put them as the core of our program. So in our high beginning level classes, all of the civics topics are addressed, and we also added employability skills and career awareness in those classes. In our intermediate ESL classes, we again focus on civics topics such as the U.S. school system, employment, consumer economics, and community resources, and in a way that they related to career exploration and workforce preparation. We also included some college readiness skills into the curriculum at the intermediate level, because again, we wanted the students to be able to make that successful transition. We also redesigned our healthcare bridge class so that it would include preparation for testing, in particular the PSB, because that was one of the major obstacles. And we also wanted to focus more on preparing students academically to transition directly into healthcare programs. We included more workforce preparation tasks and integrated civics competencies in an organic way, so that they were within the context. So, for example, health and wellness fits very well with a healthcare bridge, but so does the U.S. school system, so does employment. Another thing we did is we increased the intensity of the class so that it was more hours, so that we could cover more topics and go into more depth with them. In our ICAPS program, again, we kind of looked at how specific civics competencies, such as health and wellness, U.S. school system, and employment, how they overlapped with what we were doing with ICAPS, so that the civic competencies were being met. But we focused more on workforce preparation in our ICAPS program, especially the employability skills that Bevan mentioned. We also increased the credit hours slightly and adjusted the curriculum just a little bit. Another thing that when we were looking at what we needed, we also determined that we needed a dedicated student support specialist position for the healthcare programs who could help students with planning, any issues they may have, finding financial support, navigating systems, all these issues that the students were having. We also decided that the support specialist would offer regular workshops that are focused on workforce preparation and college success skills. Now, this all took some time. This wasn't an overnight process. It's taken us a couple of years to get to this point, but I think right now we're in a pretty strong position as far as the IELCE requirements. So once we redesigned our program, we had to think of a way to get this information to our students. And this includes developing a communication and a recruitment plan. And there were several components to that we needed to think about. We needed to develop career pathway models that we could share with students and faculty. We needed to make sure that when we presented these programs to students, that we communicated the expectations, requirements for the programs clearly, so students knew what they were signing up for. They knew how many credit hours it was. They knew how much work it would be. They knew what they would need to do to get into the program. And we also wanted to make sure that the students understood what the outcomes were. What does this certificate mean? How does this help you to get where you want to be with your career? Now, I'm going to be honest, this part of it is still a work in progress. We have developed a clear pathway model. We're still working with marketing to create recruitment brochures that we can share with the community students and the faculty that more clearly show the pathway. So we're still working on that. Currently, we do share the models with our faculty at our division meetings, and we share them with students at our orientations as well. We have a student transitions advisor who comes into the classes to talk about the bridge classes, and the ICAPS support specialists come into our classes as well to talk about our ICAPS programming. Students are presented at this point with all the expectations, requirements, and outcomes at these meetings, orientations, and presentations. Right now, we are working on how to develop a more cohesive way to communicate the pathway model, because we'd rather not have multiple people going into classes and giving students just snippets of information. We'd like to really show them how it is a pathway and not just take this class, take this class, take this class. But again, that's what we're working on. So Bevan, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what this looks like, because it sounds all pretty and flowery, but what does it actually look like in the classroom? So like I said, we redesigned our ESL program so that our high beginning classes are now our civics classes. We don't call them civics classes because we don't want it to be as separate from the program. It's part of our natural steps within the program. These high beginning ESL classes are funded with the $243 that were mentioned. Some of the things that we did is we split our high beginning into two 5 to 6 credit hour classes instead of just one. And the reason why we did this is that we wanted to be able to cover all 7 topics in civics in a meaningful way. We didn't want to do what you call coverage. We didn't just want to cover the topics and rush the students through the civics competencies, because we really feel like they are valuable to our students. They really need to have these to be successful in our community. So how we did that is in the High Beginning A class, the students covered 3 of the topics in depth and really go through the competencies or the checklist and really try to get into those pretty deeply. It's still at a beginning level, but they're going through those 3 topics. And then in our High Beginning B, our second class, they go through the other 4 topics. And we're finding that this works really well, because now every ESL student who goes through our program is exposed to those very crucial civics items. Another thing that we did is we also intentionally integrated items from the employability skills framework so that the students are better prepared for the workforce. So that some of these skills were already being taught in the classes or already being practiced, but we wanted to make it more obvious, more apparent to students and teachers what skills they were learning. And again, all of this is the context of what they were learning. They were still working on their basic skills within these contexts. So I'll give you an example of what this looks like in our classrooms. So if we look at community resources, I know you don't have the checklist in front of you, but item 1 talks about distinguishing between emergency and non-emergency situations and making a list of the corresponding telephone numbers to call for help. And CR2 is actually making a 911 phone call to report an emergency. So this is the context. So this is the civics context. The employability skills that we've integrated into this include critical thinking, cooperative work, active listening, and clear communication. The basic skills that students are working on are reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So in this scenario, students would read about emergency and non-emergency situations in groups and determine which situations fit into which category. So this would integrate, the reading, the speaking, the listening, the critical thinking, and the cooperative work. Once they did that, they would find and write the key numbers that they need to know and for who to call into a chart, which again involves critical thinking and writing. And then as a summative activities, students would role play selecting who to call, what information to share, and listening to directions and listening to the person on the 911 call on the other end. And again, this integrates critical thinking, communication, speaking, and listening. As you can see, this is a really practical exercise for the students. This is something that's very common in most textbooks and most online programs. This is a very practical skill. But this is one way that you can integrate civics, basic skills, workforce preparation, all in the same lesson. Now, one of the challenges we found with putting our curriculum together is that there isn't a textbook out there that covers everything, that presents things in a certain order that we determined was logical for our students. So we ended up using a lot of realia and technology. And actually, this is a good thing, because now our students were having to learn digital skills. They were interacting with things that were real, so it didn't seem so school-like. We find this is really challenging from some of our newer faculty who really want to have that textbook. However, we find that once they start teaching this way, using more outside resources, that they're a lot happier. They're like, oh, I don't feel so constrained in what we're doing. The other advantage is that the students interact a lot better with more realistic materials and situations. So they're feeling more engaged in what they are learning. Another thing is it's also easier to keep current with what's going on, because you're not tied to a textbook that was maybe written 5 years ago. Everything's current and relevant. And it also, allows us to increase the rigor of the lessons as appropriate for the students who are in the classroom. One unexpected advantage that came from all of this we discovered when we closed down due to COVID. We found that our instructors, because they were already doing the digital literacy skills, already working with technology tools with the students, that they were very prepared to move to online instruction. They did a really good job of transitioning, but they were already comfortable with some of these tools. Another thing that was nice was that it was the same case for our students. They didn't say, "Oh, gee, where's my book?" They were already used to interacting with a variety of materials and going online to find things. So it was a lot easier for them to make the transition to remote learning as well. All right. The other thing that we did is, no, don't move yet. Sorry, Bevan. I'm going to talk a little bit about our intermediate ESL. So high beginning, they're getting the beginning level of the civics competencies. But we didn't want to stop there. So we moved on to our intermediate ESL classes, and we touch on several of the topics again, but at that more advanced intermediate level. So again, we talk about community resources, we talk about the school system, employment and consumer economics. But in these cases, students are making full budgets, they're planning for college, they're going online, and they're looking at what schools offer, the programs they want. They're going into the community saying, okay, are there ways that I can get help with financing? They're very engaged with these civics competencies. Again, we went into career exploration in our intermediate levels. So another component of the IELCE. And again, really looking at workforce preparation, those employability skills, intentionally including them in our curriculum as an outcome, because we want to emphasize to instructors that these are important. And again, still working on those basic skills. So what we find is that the activities in these classes tend to be more project-based. So for example, part of the intermediate class is doing a career research project, and that project integrates about 5 or 6 different civics checklist items. By the time they're done, it's a multi-day, multi-week project that the students work on. But again, they're looking for, where can I go to school? They're going on to Illinois WorkNet. They're going on to all these different resources. So again, it's not textbook based, but like we found at the beginning classes, it works. So with the healthcare bridge, we made a lot of changes with our healthcare bridge, especially with the mind of the PSB preparation that the students had to do. We realized that our healthcare bridge was originally 3 credit hours. We knew we weren't getting students where we needed them to be, so we decided to move to 6 credit hours. Again, really focusing on the civics competencies that are related, really focusing on career exploration, focusing on workforce preparation, but we have that added test preparation. So for our class now, some of the things that they do is they work on workplace aptitude skills. They work on workplace communication, workplace math, digital literacy. These are all integrated into our healthcare bridge. And again, I can give you a long list of the civics competencies that we've tied to this class that students are doing as a part of the healthcare bridge. All right, Bevan, I guess I'm almost running out of time, so I'll go to the next one. We'll talk about our ICAPs. Really proud of what we were able to do with our ICAPs program as part of our Title III grant. We were able to expand the number of pathways that the students could take. So now we have BNA, phlebotomy, sterile processing, and emergency medical tech basic. So really proud that we were able to do that. Again, looked at our support classes and saw that they were still addressing some of those civics competencies even in the support classes. Workforce preparation, we added some additional workshops for students where they talk about some of those employability skills. So we really beefed up the ICAPS program as well in this process. So I'm just going to close out here a little bit. So as a result of all these changes and from people in other places in our college, we have been able to dramatically increase the number of students who are receiving civics education. The number of civics competencies being reached by our students has more than tripled, quadrupled. We've been able to increase our IELCE funding. We've also found that our students are actually successfully making the transition from the bridge class into our healthcare ICAPS program. So all of these things, it was a lot of work, but I'll tell you, it was really worth it because we're now starting to see the other end of it, and our students are being very successful. All right, I'm going to pass it back over to you, Bevan.
Catherine, go ahead.
Sure. I just want to thank Marcia for that awesome presentation. That was amazing. And if you go back and think about our component slide with those 3 colored boxes, I mean, you're doing it all, and that's not easy. I know that. So anyway, I just want to give a little shout out for that. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to share with you just some of the great resources that are available to help you build your IELCE program. And the first one here is our Illinois Toolkit. This was developed in 2019 by members of the ICCB Advisory Council. It contains information about each of the required components, and it functions as a user-friendly template for program planning. So if you have not downloaded this document, we encourage that you do. I think you'll find it helpful to, to start building those blocks that we saw earlier and that Marcia was talking about. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. We have some additional resources on this slide. And by the way, these are all live links, and you do have this PDF available and the links will function in that PDF. So the first one here is the ICAPS IET planning template. And this is another Illinois tool. And Bevan, did you want to add anything about this one? Since this is your baby, so to speak.
If a program is looking with their IELCE to develop their own ICAPS IET, this is a really good template to use in the development of that. So it's, feel free to use that, and we'll be covering more about the components of the IETs in the next session here today. So that's all I need to say about that, Catherine. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Bevan. The next one on your screen is Octave's Building Opportunities IELCE Self-Assessment Tool. And this is the product of a 3-year federal project to provide guidance and develop tools for IELCE programs around the country. And I was part of this project and part of the pilot of this tool. And many states reported during the pilot that the tool helped them really build their programs. I'll just sort of point out that it's sort of like, it's similar to our Illinois toolkit, but much more detailed. So if you've already gone through the Illinois toolkit and are looking for something that takes a deeper dive into the required components, I think this is the tool for you. And then the last one on the screen is the Illinois Essential Employability Skills Framework, and also a self-assessment tool that we looked at earlier, and that someone was asking for the link, and there it is. So that's the link to that very helpful guideline. That was really a cooperative effort between us, business and business industry and education, adult ed in Illinois. Okay.
It's also available, Catherine, on the ICCB website, and I put that in the chat as well, so they could get to it either way.
I see. Okay, thanks. I didn't catch that that's the one you put in the chat. Very good. Okay, I think we're done talking about resources. I'm going to turn it over to Bevan. She's going to talk about some of the PD that's available.
The PD that we have available, obviously you're all here today at the Transitions Academy, but this is the fall convening of the Transitions Academy, and there's a lot more to the Transitions Academy as the year goes on. It is about a year-long process, and it culminates with a spring event later on in this next coming year in FY21. But as part of the Transitions Academy, we are going to be starting in November, and it's brand new. We're going to start a Bridge virtual learning community, and we're going to also start an ICAPS virtual learning community. So that being said, if all of you are thinking about wanting to get together with some other individuals throughout the state that are either running bridges or working on developing bridges and ICAPS programs, we will be starting those virtual learning communities and asking you for some suggested things that you want to talk about as part of those. We're going to host those, but we will not be delivering content per se, but it's an opportunity for people that are in bridge programs that may be having some issues that want to discuss with other bridge programs and ICAPS programs in the ICAPS learning community. It's an opportunity for you to discuss with your peers some things and maybe find some helpful hints and helpful things to help you as you go along in either development or in scaling or in just some issues that come along. We all know during COVID, it was when this all started in March, it was like, bam, how are we going to go ahead and do these things virtually? So that would be a topic of conversation that some people could share what they're doing and possibly help others out. In addition to that, we have ongoing Transitions Academy webinars that will be coming out with a schedule with topics, and those are informative. We use existing successful programs oftentimes to address things and share topics with you that are of interest to all of the people that are working on bridges and ICAPS throughout the state. We also have ESL workforce preparation. There are multiple iLearn courses on ESL workforce preparation, as well as transitioning preparation courses as well. We have the IELCE Civics Competencies is an iLearn course. We have the IELCE Civics Classroom Activity List, which is an iLearn course as well. And then we have ICAPS Specialist and Master Instructional Professional Pathways. So if your instructors wish to learn further and advance with that and get a credential in one of those, then they can follow a guided professional development pathway. We also have a Career Navigator professional pathway for those of you that have career navigators that want to follow along a little bit more with that, with their support services. So that being said, now's an opportunity for you all to ask any questions that you would like to have answered, and we would be happy to entertain any of those questions at this time. So we'll look in the chat and see if there's anything there. We have a lot of people that are missing seeing everyone, and we all miss seeing everyone. So this is the best venue we can do right now. But if you have any needs, professional development needs in developing your IELCE, contact the ALRC for the civics education, contact the SIPDC for your IET component of that. You'll see the toolkit that Catherine referred to actually has the IELCE, the civics ed components in the front of that toolkit, and the back are the IET components. So now that we know that bridge programming can work with that as well, if you need any assistance with that, please contact us at the SIPDC. So any questions? Catherine, do you see any questions?
I do not see any questions. People are like missing each other and sending greetings to each other.
Yeah, it's a tough time. So
maybe Marcia's session intimidated people because they've done such a great job of getting their IELCE components all there. I know
right.
That can be a struggle.
Right.
So, but
okay. Well, then we will actually, since there aren't any questions, someone posted in here earlier about wanting to know about a bridge program was asking about Model 1 includes a bridge program and offers an IECAPS as well. When I kind of like answered that question saying a bridge program is not a Model 1 or a Model 2, I think that was a clarifying thing, but ICAPS comes in Model 1s and Model 2s. Model 1s being with the CTE side, usually in a community college, and the Model 2s being within a community-based organization or a school district or a regional office of education, so that those actually have outside trainers. And so then a bridge program is considered a pre-IET or a pre-ICAPS program. But what we learned at the NTI for state directors last week, Catherine, and you can expand on this a little bit more if you want, is that bridge programs will serve as the offering for an IET for students within the IELCE program.
Yes, I think Octave has increased flexibility, or is accepting more flexible program models for IELCE than was originally when the law was signed in 2014, and then the final rule came out in 2016, and it seemed a bit overwhelming, like the IELCE program must have an IET. That intimidated a lot of programs, and I think the flexibility now to include bridge as well, or to connect to a local IET in your APC is I think really will benefit our programs in Illinois that have been struggling with that part of the law. I think everyone does a really good job on the ESL and the civics and workforce prep, but it's the actual workforce training piece, that the pink box that we saw earlier, that can be the challenge.
Well, and I know one thing that we did not actually discuss today was that the populations that you can draw in for IELCE would include students that have degrees in their country of origin. And so I think we didn't discuss that. And maybe that might be something you could point out, Catherine.
Sure, that's really was the intention of the law originally, was to kind of tap into immigrants who are well trained but maybe just need to bring their English up in order to get into, increase their standard of living and become, have wages that are more family sustaining by entering fields. There's an old saying that entry-level English means an entry-level job, and there are a significant number of adult immigrants who are underemployed because their English skills are low. So the original intention was to bring those students into Section 243 programs. In reality, there can be a lot of challenges with doing the analysis of degrees from other countries. It can be expensive to pay services to analyze, the equivalence of a degree from, say, Bulgaria with a US degree. So there are agencies that you can hire to do these kinds of transcript evaluations, but it's proved problematic. And this was discussed at the national meeting last week, that it's not always clear. Someone might say, oh, they were an engineer in their country, but then what does that degree really translate to here? So it's not as simple as it seems. And in fact, the law is rather, although that's suggested in the law, it's not a requirement by any means. And we know that we have many students participating in our IELCE programs who, in fact, lack education in the first country, even high school level education. So it really is open to all adult ELLs. But as I said, the intention of the law originally was to kind of hone in on that particular population of skilled and degreed immigrants. I don't know if anyone has anything they'd like to share in the you could even unmute and share any of your experiences with that kind of adult learner in your classes.
Well, and I want to share, Mandy Dwyer posted that she thought Marcia's example was a great way to better integrate all the pieces for students. And she said that they are struggling to inform students without overwhelming them. Drop-ins to Zoom classes seem to be a bit distracting, and offering separate Zoom information sessions geared towards students in classes has worked really well for them right now. So I think that's a good point, Mandy. Thanks for sharing. Okay, that being said, we would like to thank all of you for coming today. Our contact information is right here for myself, Catherine, and Marcia. So feel free that if you have any additional questions beyond this session, you can reach out, and we'd be happy to talk with you all and entertain you on those. So if you want, you can take your little break now and then join us for the next session that's going to start here shortly. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.